The microphone screeched, and the auditorium flinched. Paper streamers quivered in the draft, sneaking under the double doors. Backstage, preschoolers in glittery capes bunched in crooked lines, one flapping like a bird, one on the verge of tears. Somewhere in the parents' row, a voice muttered, "No accompanist. What are we even doing here? These preschool teachers only know how to keep kids from falling over." At the wing, Anne crushed the creased program in her palm. The pianist's name had been crossed out in pen, replaced by a shaky note, "Homesick." The principal met Anne's eyes, apology and panic in equal parts. "If you could try." "I'll try," Anne said, though her throat felt like sand. She walked into the lights and sat at the gleaming grand. Her hands hovered over the keys, damp with sweat. From the fourth row, a man's voice, calm and impatient, floated forward. "Let's get on with it. Some of us need to put kids to bed." Anne breathed in. A tiny hand grazed her shoulder. Luna, wide-eyed.
"We're scared, Ms. Anne." "It's okay," she whispered, to them and to herself. The first sound fell like a snowflake. An opening F major, then a stream, the classroom morning song unfurling into something older, richer. Arpeggios softened the edges of dissonance. Harmony pooled warm as lamplight. The room, finally, went still, the good kind of still, when people listen. The children walked out on cue. Anne did more than accompany. She cushioned a shaky step with a gentle accent, tucked a stray voice back into pitch with a guiding phrase, lowered a long pedal note so a lost child could find his place. Music caught them like an invisible net. In the fourth row, the impatient father, Mr. Benton, sat up, surprise loosening his jaw. Beside him, Ms. Whitaker, PTA chair, lowered her iPad and simply listened. The curtains drew for a changeover. Anne stayed at the bench, modulating into a cotton-soft jazz bridge, then curving into a waltz for the Bears class to spin. A few claps sparked, then swelled. And then the past arrived, sudden as a door blown open in winter. The winter the river froze along the Charles, and Nguyen learned how long a day could be when you measured it in eighth notes. She woke before the sun and traced scales by lamplight in the shared dorm lounge because practice rooms didn't open until 6. Her roommate Miriam slept with earplugs and a silk scarf over her eyes. The scarf looked like a starless night stretched across her face. By the time other doors began to click, Anne's fingers were warm and the cheap coffee had gone metallic on her tongue. The conservatory stacked practice rooms like honeycomb cells. In the early hours, they smelled of dust and wool, the pianos slightly sharp from the overnight cold. And chose room 2B because its upright had a left pedal that actually worked, and because someone had taped a tiny paper heart beside middle C. She would sit there and watch her breath ghost the air while she ran thirds and sixths until the walls felt less like cinder block and more like a membrane that pulsed with her. Chopin's Scherzo No. 2 was the piece that winter, a storm dressed as melody, her professor called it. She loved the way it demanded everything at once, wrists loose and forearms like braided rope, pedals shallow as a held breath, touch that could skim a feather and crush a stone in the same measure. The piece made sense to her in a way the city didn't yet. This new life had new rules. A professor's raised eyebrow that could shrink a room, classmates who could joke in French about Liszt while finessing their Rachmaninoff, afternoons that dissolved into paging through scores she couldn't yet afford to buy, and pretended, when she could, that the hunger was only for music. But there were other hungers. The library job put a thin line of money into her account. The cafeteria job bled it back out for rent. She learned which bus drivers would let her ride free when the card reader spat her pass back. She learned which vending machine at which hallway sold the sandwiches that actually had meat in them. Her mother called on Sundays with recipes disguised as news. "If you add a little ginger to pork bone broth, you won't catch any winter colds." she would say, as if Boston's cold were a polite guest you could outcook. Her father spoke in the background in his sawdust voice. He worked late at the cabinet shop and always sounded like he'd brought a little of the wood home in his lungs. They asked short questions with long silences after them. Are you sleeping? Are your hands okay? Do you like your teachers? Are there other Vietnamese students? Are there people who are kind? Anne gave small, warm answers. Yes. 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 Sometimes. Yes. Her professor that term, Lasker, a man who wore black turtlenecks and very bright socks, pushed her hard and praised her rarely. You have discipline, he said once, after she nailed a passage she'd been butchering for a week. Now build a cathedral around it. He tapped her music, then his chest. Here. The audition for the scholarship was scheduled for February, deep in a week when the sun set before the second rehearsal, and the sidewalks were lined with tired brown ice. Anne dressed in her only black dress and borrowed Miriam's sheer tights. She warmed up on a stage where chairs waited like a patient audience. The panel of judges sat under a row of lamps that made halos of their hair. When she began, her hands did what she had taught them to do. The opening question, the answering hush, the sudden plunge into the river's fast water. Her body settled into good alignment. Her shoulders knew where to hang, loose but ready. She felt the piece carry her as much as she carried it. There were no missed notes. There were, if she was honest, no surprises either. She played the way a careful person runs a treacherous trail, eyes down, precise feet, afraid of how hard a fall would hurt. Afterward, the judges conferred in a rustling undertone. One smiled kindly. Another nodded. Lasker sat in the row behind them, hands folded like a monk strangling a prayer. Impressive technique, the woman in the center said at last, her voice smooth as a floor, but it's missing a heart. The sentence was small. It shouldn't have been enough to break anything, but it found a soft place in her and pressed. A second judge added something about shaping the long line. Another spoke about risk. They thanked her. Someone held the door as she left. It clicked behind her with the finality of a book closing, and spent the rest of that day trying to map the injury. Technique without heart. She had wanted to be a body that music moved through, not a body that could be disassembled and graded. She found herself laughing at a joke Miriam told, and then not remembering what the laugh sounded like. Her fingers felt both too much and not enough. That night, she dreamed she was running in snow that looked like sheet music. Her footprints made notes that evaporated as she looked, leaving lines with no voice. The call came 3 nights later, after midnight. The city had crusted over after a new snow, and the dorm hall hummed in that particular lonely way fluorescent lights do. Anne answered on the second ring, already on her feet. Her father, careful. Your mother, they found something. Probably benign, the doctor says. They want to take it out. What is it? We don't know yet, he said, and the words were a cliff edge. Then, because he was himself, he added, We'll be fine, Con. She keeps making lists. You know your mother. There were then the unspoken things, the gaps that grow teeth, time, money, being there. Anne's classes marched across her planner. Her fingers ached from the work she owed the piece, the professor, herself. Outside the window, a truck scraped along, plowing, a metal-on-ice scream. I'll come, she said, because the distance between what a daughter does and what a student does had just become a chasm that politeness couldn't bridge. Just for a bit, he said, that sawdust kindness in his chest. We will be fine. But then the days rearranged themselves. The surgery date was set. Her mother wanted to keep it quiet. No need to make a fuss, she said, as if medical procedures could be folded into drawers like sweaters.
Anne found herself mapping bus routes not to practice rooms, but to the hospital. She discovered the specific quality of waiting room light, the smell of coffee that had held too long, the way a television in the corner could be loud and useless at once. She learned new music, the beeping of a monitor, the hush of rubber soles, the whispered release of a curtain being drawn. She played quietly for her mother the night before the surgery, in the dim family lounge where fake plants tried to soften the corners. The piano there was a little Yamaha with a sticky F. She made that note a feature, a pivot that gave her an excuse to linger. Her mother dozed, lines softening on her face, mouth drifting open in an unguarded way that broke Anne again and again just to look at. "Play something brave," her mother murmured, eyes still closed. So Anne played the bravest thing she knew then. A lullaby. The kind a person sings when there isn't enough of anything, and the only possible offering is presence. The surgery was, in the doctor's language, uneventful, which meant it was the right kind of event. But recovery asked its own price, weeks that had to be paid with bodies and hours, and wrote to her professors and the registrar. The words "leave of absence" looked cold on her screen. Lasker called, voice caught between disappointment and concern. "Come back," he said. "When it's time. Don't disappear into whatever this is." "I won't," she said, knowing that people often promise things to stop other people from hurting. Spring tried to arrive, Boston resisted and rained anyway, and stacked shifts at the library and the cafeteria and slept in the chair beside her mother's bed the nights her father needed to work late. Her world shrank and lengthened. She kept her hands strong because she didn't know who she was without that. Sometimes, in the early hours when the hospital was a spaceship adrift in the galaxy of its own light, she would find that lobby piano and play softly so the security guard wouldn't shoo her away. Chopin felt wrong there, too ornate for the room. But the morning song she used to sing to herself as a child, "Wash your hands, comb your hair, shoes and socks, now you're there," fit perfectly. She braided it with something older, a hymn her grandmother had hummed while kneading dough. After a while, the conservatory felt like a story someone had told her about herself, something that had happened to a version of her that wore another girl's shoes. She didn't intend to stay away, but staying away calcified into a new shape so slowly she couldn't say when it became the plan. What music remained became practical, a lullaby for pain spikes, a scale up and down to count breaths while her mother did laps from bed to door to bed again. "Don't slow down," her mother said, smiling with the side of her mouth that wasn't caught in a grimace. "If I stop, I'll sit, and if I sit, I'll sleep, and if I sleep, the nurse will wake me up and I'll be mad." Anne laughed the way a person laughs when their heart needs an exhale. By summer, the cabinet shop called her father back for more hours. By fall, her mother returned to the kitchen with a queen's command of the kettle. "Sit, I'll pour," even if the hand that lifted the kettle trembled, and Anne stood ready to catch it. The phone calls to the conservatory thinned. Lasker emailed once at the start of the semester and once in October. Miriam sent a photo of the practice room with a new graffiti. Someone had drawn a star beside the paper heart and written, "Don't quit" in felt tip. Anne stared at the picture until she felt both warmed and scalded by it. Work came the way it often does, in the whispered recommendations of women who know which other women are tired. A friend of her mother's had a daughter who ran a preschool in a suburb not far by bus. They needed an aide, someone who didn't panic at glitter and could hold a crying child without taking the crying personally. "You can sing to them," the friend added, as if that were part of the job posting. In the interview, the preschool director, Ms. Ferreira, with silver bracelets that chimed softly when she moved, walked Anne through rooms that looked built for softness. Low shelves, soft rugs, a reading nook out of a storybook. In one corner of the pre-K room,
An upright piano leaned slightly, one caster missing, the bench wobbling like a loose tooth. "You play?" Ms. Ferreira asked, not with the evaluative tilt of a judge, but with the kind of curiosity you can rest in. "A little," Anne said, and both women pretended the lie was the kind that leads back to the truth. "We have a winter showcase," Ms. Ferreira said as they finished the tour, as if it were simply another holiday to block on a calendar. "No pressure. We hire an accompanist. Mostly, we want them to stand on a stage without melting." "I can help them not melt," Anne said, surprising herself with the confidence of it. "You look like someone who can," Ms. Ferreira said, and smiled in a way that made Anne think of warm lamps left on in kitchen windows, and accepted the job. She went home on the bus with a packet of forms and a small card that had a hand-drawn sun on it. "You're hired." Her mother hung it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. Her father studied the schedule and circled the hours he could drive her when the weather turned bad. That night, Anne lay in bed and pictured the upright piano with its missing foot. She pictured a small hand sticking a sticker above a key to "make it shine," because children are scientists who specialize in light. The conservatory receded. Not entirely, not like a ship vanishing, but like a coastline you can still smell salt from. She told herself she wasn't abandoning anything. She was walking a road across a different kind of map. The next morning, she reported for her first day. She learned the names of 22 children and the names of their stuffed animals. She learned that if you sang the cleanup song one beat too slow, they would all collapse into the carpet like soldiers felled by a general's miscount. She learned that when a child wants their mother, want is a cathedral of need. At nap time, she lifted the upright's fallboard and found her fingers without thinking. She played a low E that made the air vibrate like a purr. The room went quiet, not because of rules, but because of resonance. Later, when she told her mother about it, her mother said, "See? The heart knows where to go." Anne didn't say, out loud, that she had always been afraid the heart had left, or that it was this shy thing that would flee when anyone looked too closely. She didn't say that she heard the judge's sentence sometimes in the squeak of the bus brakes or in the squeal of a shopping cart wheel. She didn't say that she was beginning to suspect that maybe the heart wasn't a thing you put into music, like a coin into a vending machine, but a thing that climbed up when the ground was sturdy and there was room. On Friday, Ms. Ferreira posted a note for parents. "Save the date. Winter showcase." The paper was cut into the shape of a snowman, buttons crooked with charm, and traced the letters with her eye and felt something click. It wasn't a door closing. It was a door finally, gently opening. She stayed late that evening, straightening block towers for the joy of dismantling them herself. The room emptied of child sound until the only noise was the heater's quiet throat clearing. She sat on the bench of the upright and pressed the key above middle C just to see if anyone had left a sticker there. Not yet, she thought, but soon. She lowered her hands and let a simple progression fill the room, a thing small enough to fit between a breath and a light switch. In it, she heard, distantly, the will of a night to come, a room full of parents and soft panic, a missing accompanist, a bench with a steady leg, a child whispering, "We're scared," and someone saying, "It's okay," and meaning it because it had become true. She played until she could feel the outline of that night like a shoreline beneath her feet. On Monday, the first glitter storm hit. It arrived the way weather arrives in a room designed for small people. A single shaker bottle turned at the wrong angle, a cascade of metallic confetti spreading like a galaxy across the art table, Diego's breath hitching at the shine, Luna gleefully patting her hair to make the flecks stick. The air filled with tiny gasps and the sharper sound of a grown-up's inhale, the start of scolding, the edge of no. And crossed the room before the word could harden. She pressed one finger to the upright's lowest E, drawing that warm, feline hum up from the floorboards. A second note, a third, and then a slow figure that rose like steam. The children's bodies remembered before their minds did. Spines softened, small shoulders drifted down. Someone giggled and smiled without looking up from the keys. "Watch," she said, keeping her voice in the same register as the music. "How the sparkles fall when our hands are quiet as snow." 22 pairs of hands hovered, then settled. The glitter went from explosion to weather pattern. Diego edged closer, his palms no longer wedged against his ears. Luna's eyes were dancing. She'd smuggled 2 star stickers under her sleeve before center time, and Anne could already tell where those were going to end up. By noon, Anne had learned the difference between chaos that needed rules and chaos that needed rhythm. She learned the names of the class, and then learned the names the children had for themselves. Nora, who was also Astronaut Nora when she wore the colander helmet. Cole, who answered to Thunder Boots on Fridays because his rain boots stomped like timpani. Luna, who was always just Luna, a proper noun and an idea. The upright piano leaned in the corner like a tired relative, one caster missing so its front left leg nested in a stack of old workbooks. The bench wobbled just enough to force Anne to choose, press down with her left foot and tilt into the bass, or live on the right and let the treble breathe. She chose, measure by measure. The middle pedal was mostly pretend, a stubborn adolescent refusing to admit it could be useful. In the afternoons, when the lights went softer and the rug collected naps, Anne played the room the way a person learns the moods of a living thing. If a child had a wobbly day, she used a steady 2/4 to walk them back to themselves. If the whole group's energy went jagged, she lowered into 6/8 and let them sway. She discovered the precise tempo at which 22 bodies could tidy blocks without staging a rebellion. She started thinking in solutions that had time signatures. Parents existed in the peripheries at first, outer planets in the classroom's solar system, quick orbits at drop-off and pickup, weather reports delivered through slitted doors. Ms. Whitaker, PTA chair, moved like a woman engaged in 3 tasks at once. She wore a smartwatch and pegged her day to it. It tapped her wrist and she tapped the school. "Reminder, winter showcase," she said one morning. Not really to Anne so much as to the air, stylus clicking against her iPad with the crispness of a metronome. "We have a run of show from last year. Same accompanist. Low risk." Behind her, Mr. Benton, carpenter's hands, the kind of frown people wear when they're doing math, nudged Harper forward with a lunchbox. "If there's a dress rehearsal, I need it on the calendar," he said, voice flat as a board planed by habit. "I'm not keen on bedtimes exploding because people can't start on time." "We start on time," Ms. Whitaker said without looking at him. "This is a professional operation." "It's preschool," he said, not unkindly, but with a weight that landed on the word like a stamp, and opened the door wider. "We'll get everyone to the stage without turning into pumpkins," she said, aiming for lightness. Harper slipped her hand into Anne's and exhaled, as if that sentence had been a coupon someone finally offered at the register. The morning song did the work of a liturgy. Wash hands, find line, breathe together, hello, and taught it as a round one day, and the children rose to the puzzle. Another morning she pulled the melody through a G Mixolydian scale, and they watched, fascinated, as the familiar thing put on a new coat. They were patient with her experiments because she was patient with their need to do the stickers in exactly the right order. Diego, sensitive to every bulb's hum, taught him how to make shade inside a bright room. Soft caps on fluorescents, a scarf pinned over a corner lamp, the smallest person's permission to control the dimmer on rehearsal days. "You get to be the sun," she told him, and he took the job like a knight takes a quest, solemnly, happily, a little taller. During quiet reading, Luna sidled up in the way of children who haven't yet learned to announce their need. She pressed something into Anne's palm, one of those little star stickers, as predicted, slightly linty from a sleeve life. "For your piano," she whispered, "so that key knows it's the important one." Then, seriously, "But don't tell the other keys." Anne wanted to say that the best music happens when nothing has to be the important one, that the work is in listening, in finding a place. Instead, she tucked the star into the pocket of her cardigan, thumbed its tiny raised bump, and said, "Your secret's safe." In the staff room, between mouthfuls of yogurt and pep talks, winter preparations took shape. The bulletin board grew a paper stage with paper curtains. Ms. Ferreira, the principal, tacked up a sign-up sheet for volunteers. A local accompanist, Evan Lake, who'd played at the church down the street and for another preschool on the other side of town, confirmed the date and his rate over the phone. "Reliable," Ms. Ferreira said after hanging up. "We'll do a quick rehearsal with him next week." Anne nodded. The word reliable did what it always did inside her, soothed one part, pressed on another. She had told Ms. Ferreira very little about Boston and Chopin and the judge's sentence, and Ms. Ferreira had asked for very little. Respect can feel like silence when you're used to accounting for yourself. On rehearsal day, they borrowed the elementary school auditorium, a space designed to swallow little voices and return them louder, stranger. The custodians unfurled velvet curtains and wheeled the grand piano into place. Evan arrived with a scarf, pleasant, professional, his hello the exact pitch of someone who knows where to be and what to do. He and Anne traded nods, the secret handshake of people who share a bench. Lights. The first cue left Diego blinking in a square of white. His chest hitched, and Anne's brain moved faster than the feeling rising in her own ribs. "Dimmer, son," she said, and Diego put his hand on the little slider like he was landing a plane. The bright softened. He let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and the small muscles around his eyes released, and pulsed a gentle D into the air, and Evan caught it immediately, folding into her 1564 like they'd agreed on it in another room. Ms. Whitaker stood at the back recording notes on her iPad, as if she were notating an orchestra. "The Bears class needs to pick up tempo out of the second chorus," she said to no one and to everyone. Then, without looking up, "Great save on the lights, Ms. Anne." Anne blinked. The praise was as precise as criticism. Mr. Benton, hovering near row 4, watched Harper do her small, brave part and then stared, longer than necessary, at the piano. His eyes moved from the instrument to the bench, probably noting the wobble, the way Anne's left foot danced to keep equilibrium. Later, at pickup, he'd nod at the piano and say, almost offhand, "That leg's loose? I can fix that." He didn't say it then. He watched, thinking the way people think when they see a problem they know how to solve. Back in the classroom, Anne charted minutes like beats, coat chaos, allegro, into hallway walk, andante, into bathroom transition, moderato, into rug circle, adagio, if everyone's snack went well. She kept a jar on the piano labeled Sound Ideas. Children dropped scraps into it with drawings and invented words. Plop, shiver, yellow zing. On Fridays, they upended the jar and tried to make those sounds with hands and voices and the piano's guts. A science lab for noise. At pickup, adults tried on opinions the way they tried on coats, quickly, for fit. "Bless you, I could never spend a whole day with 3-year-olds, one mother said, tone sweet and edged. Another laughed. "I don't know how you do it. My 2 are animals by dinner," as if Anne's calm were a kind of petting zoo trick. No one said babysitter, not allowed, but the word floated sometimes, a balloon someone forgot to pop. It didn't sting the way it might have. Anne had already learned where her work lived. Still, she felt the balloon brush her shoulder, faintly annoying, faintly sad. The more she moved inside the class's rhythms, the more her own rhythms changed. The judge's sentence didn't vanish, but it receded, like an echo put to honest work. She found herself playing in the evenings, after the last child had been zipped and buckled and the last paper cup had found its way to the recycling, just to hear the room answer back. The upright's faults were now features. The bass had a woolly generosity she could lean into without apology. "Why don't you perform?" Ms. Ferreira asked one late Friday, lingering by the doorway with a stack of permission slips and a tea that had lost its steam. The question wasn't prying. It was a door left ajar. "I used to," Anne said, fingers resting on the fallboard. "I wanted it to be everything." "And now?" Ms. Ferreira's bracelets sang softly when she shifted the papers. "Now I like that it's something," Anne said. She didn't say still, and Ms. Ferreira didn't ask her to. Snow began showing up in the forecast like a polite RSVP. The children practiced walking on and off the taped stage line in the classroom, Luna whispering counts under her breath like a spell, and built transitions the way one builds bridges in a hurry, with whatever she had, tested by foot, reinforced by attention. She wrote key changes on sticky notes and stuck them to the fallboard where tiny eyes couldn't see, not because she needed the reminder, exactly, but because there was something comforting about redundancy when you're carrying other people over water. The week before the show, Evan texted Ms. Ferreira to confirm. "All set for Thursday. Any special cues?" Ms. Ferreira forwarded the message to staff with a little celebratory emoji. The PTA email thread grew 3 new subthreads: cookies, programs, emergency glitter procurement. Ms. Whitaker took charge of a spreadsheet with a calm that bordered on romance. On Wednesday, after the last rehearsal, Anne stayed in the auditorium a few extra minutes. The custodians had already started their end-of-day waltz, stacking chairs, unplugging this, locking that. She eased the grand's fallboard open and let her fingers drop into a quiet progression. The big piano answered with a voice that made her own sound smaller than the room and larger than herself in the same instant. She pictured the next night, the breath before curtains part, the small feet, the first missed entrance, the save. She pictured Evan's nod, the principal's clasped hands, Ms. Whitaker's stylus hovering, Mr. Benton pretending not to be nervous while being very nervous. She pictured Luna's sticker, already tucked into her cardigan pocket, finding its way under a key here, the way it had under a key there. She pictured Diego as the sun. The world held steady. It was easy to believe the word reliable would keep doing its job. On the bus home, a woman coughed and apologized to no one. The driver's radio crackled with some news about a winter bug rolling through the schools, and dug her scarf deeper into her collar. She tried not to narrate the cough into a plot point. At home, she wrote names on index cards for choir risers and laid them out on her kitchen table like a tarot reading for the future. Where to put the steady kids, how to build a wall of sound that was also a hug. She texted her mother a picture of the cards. "Look at your little general," her mother wrote back. "Don't forget to sleep." And set her alarm for early and fell asleep composing the first 8 bars of Tomorrow. Her phone buzzed late, later than people should text if they're not family. She turned, half waking, and saw the preview bloom in the dark. Evan Lake. Anne, "I'm really sorry." She was fully awake before she finished reading. Her phone buzzed late, later than people ought to text unless they shared blood or trouble. The preview bloomed in the dark. Evan Lake. "Anne, I'm really sorry." She was upright before she finished reading. Fevers at 102. Tested negative for flu, positive for something that makes you useless, according to my doctor. I can't make it tomorrow. I can send cues or tracks. I hate this. A second bubble arrived before she could answer. "Do not let me infect your entire school. Please forgive me." The room felt suddenly too quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't rest but suspension. She typed, "Take care of yourself," and meant it, and as she hit send, another thread lit up. Staff, Winter Showcase. Ms. Ferreira. "Team, Evan is down sick. We'll figure it out. Ideas welcome. I'm calling around in the morning." Ms. Whitaker. Contingency A, tracks. Contingency B, another pianist. Contingency C, minimal accompaniment, clap, stomp. We do not cancel. Anne, I can play if we need to. She stared at the words a beat too long after sending them, as if she hadn't written them. As if someone braver, and also strangely softer, had borrowed her thumbs. Ms. Ferreira. Bless you. Let's explore all options. Rest if you can, Anne. Rest was more theory than practice. She moved through the apartment on autopilot, kettle on, mint tea that tasted like a question. Her body remembered the posture of panic and then remembered what to do with it. She found a notebook, the kind with soft paper that forgave frantic pens, and drew columns. Song, key, tempo, cue, emergency exit. She listed them in the order the children would hit the stage. Morning song round, F, Eek 72, Q, Luna's hand signal. Bear's waltz, C, 1, 2, 3, Q, Ms. Reed's shoulder tap. We Are the Lights, D, E 80, Q, Principal's microphone intro, chorus repeats out. She drew a second list. Bridges, F, C, 2-bar pivot on A minor. C, G, secondary dominant with a jazz tint. G, D, lift through B minor shading. D, silence, hold and release. Under emergency exits, she wrote, if a child freezes, drop tempo, simplify left hand to heartbeat. If entrance is missed, vamp 4 bars, smile at the sun, Diego, let him dim and raise. If chaos, teach audience to clap a 2/4 pattern, bring them in, reset. The judge's sentence, impressive technique, missing a heart, floated to the edge of her mind and then, for once, did not sit at the center. The hospital Yamaha arrived instead, her mother asleep, the lobby's tired ficus, that sticky F that became a hinge. Play something brave, her mother had murmured. She had then. She would, now. She texted 2 former classmates, one working weddings, another teaching at a dance studio on the off chance of a substitute. Both responded with apologies and schedules that had been booked for hours before this nightmare's shift. She called the church down the street. The organist there had an evening mass. A polite string of I'm sorries stacked into a polite wall. She turned to tracks. YouTube karaoke for We Are the Lights existed, somewhere out in the digital waters, but in versions that changed tempo like a tired runner on a hill, smooth in a studio, treacherous in a room full of 5-year-olds. Licensing made Ms. Whitaker nervous. For once, Anne was grateful for a nervous spreadsheet. The delay between a phone and the auditorium speakers would be a killing half-second. The children would chase the sound and never catch it. And crossed out tracks before the ink finished drying. It was going to be her. Not because she had something to prove, but because a promise had shifted shape and found her hands. She slept in pieces, 20 minutes, then 30, then an hour that felt like a day, and woke into a morning that smelled of snow. At school, breath already smoked in the air of the corridor. Ms. Ferreira arrived with red cheeks and a second scarf. Ms. Whitaker had a binder that had acquired 2 new tabs overnight. Contingency and cheerful phrases. We will be fine, Ms. Ferreira said, a fact disguised as comfort. And if we are not fine, we will be kind, which is the same thing tonight. Tracks are out, Ms. Whitaker said briskly. Aunt Susan's neighbor plays guitar, but he knows 3 chords and 2 of them belong to Bob Dylan. I vote for live piano. Anne? I'm in, Anne said. The words sat in her mouth with the right weight. The children performed their weekday rituals as if ritual were a spell. Anne leaned into the predictability like a person leans into a railing on a balcony. She kept their morning the same. Soap song, lineup, book baskets. She backed lunch 5 minutes early to build a margin that felt like a shoulder to lean on later. The room was full of the sound of small choices. Between that sound and the clock, she practiced. Not the pieces, that would come later in the auditorium, but the feeling of a night going right. She played under the cleanup chorus and found the spot her foot could live on the wobble bench without making her knees hurt. She teased a modulation while tying a shoelace and felt the shoelace tie itself faster because her hands knew their jobs. "Big night," said Mr. Alvarez, the custodian, pausing in the doorway with a roll of gaffer tape and the expression of a person who can fix almost anything except nerves. "You need anything?" "Friction," Anne said, gesturing at the bench. "In the auditorium. The bench there is slick. If it slides, I'll slide." Mr. Alvarez nodded. "I'll bring doorstops and tape. I can wedge you in like a good idea." Luna, overhearing, pressed a hand to her cardigan pocket. "Don't forget the star." "I won't," Anne said, touching the tiny bump of sticker through knit. Another ritual in the making. By afternoon, the weather had decided to make a show of itself, snow performing its own white showcase on the sidewalks. Parents arrived layered and anxious, rosy and late. Ms. Whitaker ran a loading dock at the auditorium door with the focus of an air traffic controller. "Cookies go backstage, programs to the left, children to the right. If your child is wearing a cape, please ensure the cape is attached to the child and not to the child's sibling." Mr. Benton shepherded Harper in, boots thumping. He held a small canvas bag. Tools clanked softly. "Bench?" he asked Anne. "In the classroom, it's a menace," she said. "Here, it's just slick." "I brought felt and a screwdriver," he said, as if he were saying I brought confidence. "We'll see what we can do." Backstage bloomed into a temporary city of paper stars and shaky bravery. The curtain was heavier up close, smelling faintly of dust and pride. The grand piano sat center stage, glossy as a lake at night, and approached it and laid her palm on the fallboard as if greeting something alive. Keys weighted differently than the uprights, action slower, deeper. She played a simple scale and felt the room answer back with a voice that vibed her ribs. Fear moved through her, then moved out, the way a wave moves through a pier without taking it down. "Anne," Ms. Ferreira said from the wing, voice low with gratitude and running lists. "If at any point you need to stop, we stop. If at any point the audience gets helpful, I will become a wall." "We won't need it," Anne said, and believed and didn't, both, in equal measure. "But thank you." Evan texted a last apology with a fever emoji that somehow didn't make her want to roll her eyes. The message included a photo of his cat, judgmental, as if to say, "You will do better than he would have anyway," and sent back a picture of the Grand's keys, their black and white astronomy. "Feel better. We've got it." Mr. Alvarez arrived with gaffer tape and 2 rubber wedges, knelt, and fixed the bench's slide like a magician. "Try it," he said. She did, and the bench held. "Good," he said. "When it's time to be steady, let the furniture do its job." Diego checked the dimmer twice, his little jaw set with NASA-level seriousness. "I can bring it down to a 3, he whispered, then up to a 5. But never to a 10 unless Ms. Reed says. "You're the sun," Anne said. "You set the sky." He nodded, whole planets turning behind that nod. Luna found Anne's elbow, a ship docking. "The star," she said, urgent. "It needs a home." "Help me choose," Anne said. Together they lifted the fallboard and very carefully pressed the sticker beneath middle C where no one would see it, but Anne would feel it, a tiny truth she could touch. "It's our secret," Luna breathed. "So the key knows it's brave." The auditorium filled in waves, boots, whispers, the glittering awkwardness of parents trying to be polite to people they'd judged in the parking lot. Ms. Whitaker's voice, amplified only by tone, guided volunteers like a metronome disguised as kindness. She looked at Anne once and, without words, tilted her chin. "Thank you." In row 4, Mr. Benton took his seat, scanning the program. his mouth pressed flat on run of show, the way of a man hunting for landmines in polite print. He leaned to Harper and pointed at the order. Harper pointed back at the stage, at the piano, at Anne, and smiled. Something unclenched in his face, a tiny, tiny thing, a hinge, and saw it and didn't pin it to the corkboard of her expectations. She let it pass like a sparrow and was glad for the glimpse. The house lights dipped for the principal's welcome. A microphone squeak tried to humor the room into nervous laughter and succeeded in breaking the ice. Ms. Ferreira stood at the lectern with a stack of cards she didn't need. "Tonight," she said, "our children will remind us what practice sounds like when it turns into courage." Perfume and winter coats and the electricity of waiting made a fragrance only schools know. And flexed her hands, felt the rub of the sticker through the fall board, and aligned her breath with the backstage's hum, a beehive made of hope. She did not look at the wings as a judge. She looked at them as a river that, if she stepped into it with care, would carry an entire raft. "Miss Anne?" The whisper at her side was small. Harper, peeking around Ms. Reed's skirt, held up her paper certificate as if it were a shield and a flag both. "I'm not scared," Harper announced, then added, as if accounting were honesty's cousin, "I'm a little scared." "That's the bravest way to be," Anne said. "A little scared, a lot ready." Harper tucked the certificate under her arm like a clarinet and marched back to her line. Anne's phone buzzed one last time. Her mother. "We're in row. Your father refuses to admit he's crying already. Play like you're making soup." The bubble of laughter that rose in Anne's chest was exactly the right size. It didn't spill. "Places!" Ms. Whitaker called, and somehow made the word feel like an invitation rather than a command. Anne stepped into the lights. They were a little too bright and a little too warm, and she was exactly the right person for them. The bench stayed put. Her feet found the pedals as if the floor had risen to meet them. The children, held aloft by the entire community's ridiculous, gorgeous labor, waited for sound. She lowered her hands. They stepped into the side hallway where warm cocoa air met the sting of snow sneaking in through the loading dock. The hum of cleanup, rolling risers, the clack of folding chairs, faded to an even hush, and felt the charge of the stage draining from her fingers by degrees, leaving behind a steadier current. Mr. Benton held Harper's hand and the canvas tool bag by turns, as if he needed both anchors. His voice, when it came, had lost the impatient edge Anne had heard at drop-off and earlier in row 4. "I said some wrong things," he began, eyes on the scuffed baseboards. "About tonight. About what you do. I want to apologize." Harper looked from her father to Anne as if watching a weather system change. "You don't owe me that," Anne said automatically, then heard herself and corrected, "Thank you, I appreciate it." He nodded, grateful for the straight path. "I build cabinets, I fix things. I like problems with screws," he said, lifting the bag. "When I'm tired, I can get particular about schedules. When I get particular, I forget the rest of the picture." He gestured toward the auditorium, where laughter swelled and ebbed. "Tonight, you kept the whole picture." Harper tugged his sleeve. "Tell her the other thing." He cleared his throat. "Right, the other thing. The bench in your classroom wobbles. I can fix that properly. New leg, not just shims. Tonight, Mr. Alvarez wedged the stage one solid, but I can give the upright a leg that won't dance when you don't want it to." "Please," Anne said. No protest, no humble refusal. "I would love that." "And," he added, glancing at Harper, "she wants to ask you something." Harper lifted her rolled certificate, telescope style. "Do you teach piano?" The question came out brave and formal, like a ribbon cutting. Anne's first answer rose, "I don't do lessons." But a second answer arrived with it, just as ready. The night had rearranged some furniture in her. "I don't do private lessons," she said, "but I've been thinking about starting a family music night here. Not a class. More like a place to play together. Parents, kids, grandparents, anyone who wants to bang middle C without being shushed." Harper's eyes grew star-big. "We can bang?" "Within reason," Anne said, smiling. "We can also listen. Sometimes those are the same thing." Mr. Benton rubbed the strap of the tool bag, considering. "I can bring my mother-in-law's Yamaha," he said slowly. "It's been quiet for a while, but the keys are good, if you have space." "We'll make space," came a voice from the doorway. Ms. Whitaker, iPad tucked like a book under her arm, had the look of someone pretending she hadn't just eavesdropped. "Family music night sounds useful." She caught herself, softened the word. "Lovely. I can bring cookies." She said it like a person discovering a new muscle, offering sugar instead of schedules. "Cookies will make it official," Anne said. "Thursday?" Mr. Benton asked. "Next week?" "Thursday," Anne agreed. He shifted the tool bag to his other hand. "I'll come by tomorrow to measure the bench." Harper offered Anne a palm confettied with glitter. "You played brave," she said again, as if brave were a currency she could hand over, and closed her own glitter-streaked hand around it, nodded, and watched them go, father, daughter, bag, toward a parking lot that looked different to her now. Backstage, the last of the paper stars were being peeled from the curtains. The fifth graders on stage crew practiced solemn bowing at each other and nearly tripped over their dignity. Ms. Ferreira reappeared with a cup of cocoa and a look that said, "Sit or I'll make you." Anne sat on the edge of the riser and let steam bathe the red in her hands. "You did more than keep it together," Ms. Ferreira said, perching beside her. "You taught the room how to be a room." Anne shook her head and laughed, the sound catching on some soft place in her chest. "Diego taught the lights how to be lights," she said. "Mr. Alvarez taught the bench how to be furniture. The kids taught the adults how to clap with whole hands. I kept time." "Which is what hearts do," Ms. Ferreira said lightly, then squeezed Anne's shoulder and left her with the kind of silence that isn't empty. Anne's phone buzzed, played like soup. "People are warm," her mother texted again, doubling down. A second bubble followed. "Dad says bring home 2 cookies. He will heroically eat the broken ones." A third, her father's punctuationless claim, "Proud of you, kid." She sent a picture of her glittery knuckles holding Luna's second star. "Souvenir," she wrote. By the time she locked her classroom and stepped into the snow, it was late enough that the plows had carved neat rivers down the street. The cold bit in a way that made the inside of her nose sting. She walked home faster than usual, warmed by the leftover speed of the night. Sleep arrived like a dropped curtain. When morning lifted it, Anne lay a while watching light paw at the blinds. She reached for her phone, and rather than text, called home. Her mother answered with a voice already smiling. "I heard you cooked," her mother said. "Soup for a lot of people," Anne answered, stealing the metaphor because it fit. They traded the news around the ladle. How much snow, who clapped, whether Ms. Ferreira cried, a little, whether anyone fainted, no, but a kazoo went rogue. Then her mother, careful, eased a different subject into the pot. "Do you remember that judge," she asked, "who said, what did he say? Technical, but missing a heart," Anne supplied. The words no longer stung. They rang like an artifact you can hold up and turn in the light. "I think he was wrong," her mother said, straightforward as always. "Or maybe he wasn't wrong then, but he'd be wrong now." "I think I was wrong about what the heart was supposed to do," Anne said. "I thought I had to put it into the music like a coin."
Last night it felt like the music lifted up because the heart was already in the room.
I just didn't get in its way. Her mother hummed, pleased. Bring the broken cookies, she said, practical again. Your father believes in recycling. After breakfast, Anne headed back to school with a tote of cups and a box of batteries for the lanterns they'd used. The hallway still smelled faintly of cocoa and construction paper pride. In her classroom, the upright leaned in its corner, faithful, tired, bench askew. She ran a hand along its fallboard and felt gratitude gather behind her sternum like a second, slower breath. A head popped around the door. "Permission to enter with tools," Mr. Benton said. Harper's hat had bear ears. She waved like a tiny foreman. "Permission granted," Anne said. He set the canvas bag on the rug, unrolled a cloth pouch, and laid out his instruments the way surgeons do, each with a little intention. Harper knelt and organized screws into families, whispering, "This one is the mom, this one is the cousin." "You weren't kidding," he said after rocking the bench and watching the loose leg wobble in admission. "They must have over-tightened the bolt and crushed the fibers. I'll fit a new leg with a proper mortise and tenon, not that metal plate situation. Can the bench live here a day or two without a leg?" "It's been living on wobbles since September," Anne said. "A day without a leg sounds luxurious." Harper looked up. "Luxurious means fancy," she informed the bench. Mr. Benton measured, marked, and, before he left, slid a temporary brace under the offending corner. "This will hold you until I can make the new one," he said. "Consider it a crutch with good manners." "Thank you," Anne said. "Thursday for the music night?" He nodded. "We'll bring the Yamaha. It has a scar along the lid from when my mother-in-law moved once without measuring a doorway. It's ugly. It's also my favorite part." "Scars make good stories," Anne said. That afternoon, Anne typed a short note to families and taped it to the front door. Family Music Night. Thursdays, 6-7 p.m. Bring a sound, voice, claps, instrument, spoon, heartbeat. Cookies welcome. Ms. Whitaker stopped mid-stride, read it twice, and, it seemed to surprise even her, smiled. "I'll bring oatmeal raisin," she said, then added, "and paper towels," which was her way of promising to try not to bring a clipboard. Diego, solemn son, touched the paper with one finger. "Can I dim the lights at music night?" he asked. "You can be the moon," Anne said. "The moon tells the lights which shades to wear." He took the promotion with due gravity. By Thursday evening, the community room had been rearranged into a circle. Mr. Alvarez had pushed tables aside and found a string of mismatched lamps in a storage closet, the kind schools collect over decades of donations. The effect was imperfect and kind in the best proportion. The door opened to families carrying small noises. A baby in a snowsuit contributed squeaks. A teenager who had planned not to care brought a ukulele and an attitude that softened by 10% every 5 minutes. A grandmother came with a knitting bag and, when pressed, admitted she'd played organ 3 churches ago. She claimed to have forgotten everything. Her hands, later, disagreed. Mr. Benton and Harper arrived with the Yamaha on a dolly, the scar along its lid an honest stripe. He and Mr. Alvarez wrangled it into the room, set it against a wall, and stood grinning at it as if they'd just parked a classic car in a cozy garage. He knelt to replace the bench's temporary brace with the new leg he'd made, rounded edges, sanded smooth. He fitted it with the satisfaction of a puzzle piece finally finding home. "Sit," he said to Anne, playful. "Test drive." She lowered herself onto the bench. It didn't wobble. It didn't even consider wobbling. It behaved like furniture with a job and pride in doing it. The relief was ridiculous and perfect. "Approved," she said. "Good," he said, then straightened and looked, suddenly shy. I brought these." He pulled a small box from the tool bag. Inside, felt pads, soft as winter. For the bottom of the Yamaha, so we don't scar your floors like my mother-in-law scarred that lid. We like good scars, Harper reminded him, and patted the piano as if it were a patient dog. The room filled in pockets. People chose chairs, then they traded chairs, then they moved the chairs closer. Anne stood, not at the front because there wasn't one, and lifted her hands not to conduct but to welcome. "No performing," she said. "Just playing. If you know 3 notes, we'll make 3-note music. If you know 1, we'll make 1-note music. If you're 5 and your note is loud, we'll call it percussion and blame me later." That earned a laugh that shook tension out of a dozen shoulders. She began with a circle game. 1 note passed to the next person like a handshake. "When it gets to you," she said, "play whatever you think comes next." She tapped middle C Harper to her left, answered with G, decisive. Mr. Benton chose E, tentative at first, and built a C major around those choices, and the room heard itself into a chord. Across the circle, a grandmother leaned over the Yamaha, pressed 2 thin E's with a tremor, and a boy answered from a plastic recorder with the gravest low C to ever come out of a bright green tube. People laughed and then listened harder because they were laughing less and hearing more. Ms. Whitaker, who had sat on the very edge of the circle with a box of cookies like a shield, slid toward the middle without seeming to notice. "What color is that?" she asked Luna after a small cluster of notes hung and warmed. "Orange," Luna said, considering the sound from several angles. "Like the peel when you bend it and it squirts a little." She pantomimed the twist. Ms. Whitaker laughed, a sound different from her meeting laugh, and nodded as if orange were a note available on her iPad. Diego asked for permission to dim, and bowed to the moon. He drew the slider down until the lamps did the heavy lifting, then back up in small steps, showing the room how shade could change sound without swallowing it. A toddler clapped at the trick as if day and night were his personal puppets. At some point, the teenager with the ukulele forgot to pretend. He learned a 4-chord pattern from Anne and taught it to a father with hands too big for the fretboard. They laughed at their mutual clumsiness and called it a duet. The grandmother who had forgotten everything found the exact spacing that made the Yamaha's middle register glow and, without fanfare, laid a hymn under the circle so gently even the skeptical knees in the room softened. "Your turn," Anne said to Ms. Whitaker when the cookies made their second lap. "Oh, I don't—" Ms. Whitaker began, then reached a single finger to the Yamaha as if testing bathwater. She pressed A. It sounded like a beginning. She smiled down at her hand, surprised by her own body. "I see," she said, a sentence that rearranged where her eyes would live in this room from now on. They made noise for an hour that clock time converted into something else. The room found a pulse that wasn't performance and wasn't supervision. It was attention, shared and forgiving. People apologized less with each note. When it ended because someone's baby yawned so wide the circle laughed itself closed. They stacked chairs without needing to assign tasks. Mr. Benton volunteered to store the Yamaha in the school's equipment room between Thursdays. He and Mr. Alvarez rolled it away with the ceremonial care of pallbearers in reverse, carrying something into life, not out of it. "Next week?" Ms. Whitaker asked, as if daring the calendar to argue. "Next week," Anne said. Families drifted out in clusters, voices worn soft. The room exhaled. Anne stood in the doorway a moment and let the last hum fade, then returned to her classroom. The upright was waiting, its new bench legs settling like a spine healed. She opened the fallboard and took from her pocket one of Luna's spare star stickers, the extra the girl had insisted she keep in case the first one gets lonely, and pressed it above the key where her hand had trembled on showcase night. The sticker sat there silly and perfect. She played one warm chord, nothing fancy, just an honest D that filled the corners, and held it until the air could carry it without help. The empty room listened the way rooms do when they like who they belong to. She closed the piano, straightened a stack of picture books, and turned out the lamp. In the hallway, the flyers for family music night fluttered when the door swung shut, as if nodding to themselves. On her walk home, the snow had stopped. The street's quiet felt chosen, not imposed, and tucked her hands into her sleeves and thought about next Thursday. Not the music exactly, but the chairs, the circle, the way Diego would measure the light, the way Ms. Whitaker would ask a color question and not reach for a spreadsheet. She reached for her phone at the corner and typed a message to Lasker she hadn't imagined sending a year ago. "You told me to build a cathedral around discipline. Found one. No stained glass, but the windows are open." She hovered on send, then sent it. Seconds later, 3 dots appeared, then a short reply. "Cathedrals are where people gather. Proud of you. Keep the doors unlocked." And smiled into her scarf. The bench at school would not wobble tomorrow. The Yamaha would have a corner to live in once a week. Her mother would be waiting with a story about a neighbor and soup. A room full of people would keep learning how to hear themselves with one another. And the next time someone said preschool teachers only babysit, maybe the sentence would feel as strange in their mouths as it sounded in her head now. A week later, the community room lamps clicked on again, and the circle grew by 3 chairs and 2 new sounds. Nobody brought a program. Everybody brought a pulse. They came in with the weather on their shoulders, scarves unwinding, hats thunking down on the radiator covers. Ms. Whitaker arrived first, astonishing herself by placing a tray of oatmeal raisin cookies in the very middle of the circle, as if sugar, not spreadsheets, were the thing that held people together. Mr. Alvarez unearthed yet another lamp from the storage closet, this one with a shade that made the light look like it had been washed warm. He set it near the Yamaha, whose scar along the lid had already become a landmark people pointed to like an affectionate joke. New faces appeared at the door and did that threshold dance, 1 foot in, 1 foot still braced for retreat. A tall father with a shy slouch held up a harmonica like contraband. "I only know 1 note, he warned. "Then we'll make 1-note music," Ann said, and meant it. A mother Ann knew only as Theo's mom raised a tote bag that read "Speech therapy is a team sport," and grinned. "I brought a call-and-response game," she said. "No pressure. I promise not to grade anyone's vowels." The teenager with the ukulele returned, hair in his eyes, pretending he'd been dragged. He sat 2 chairs closer to the center than last time. They opened with the passing note again. Middle C left Ann's finger and traveled clockwise. Harper's decisive G, Mr. Benton's tentative E, Luna's bright high C like a bead of light. The harmonica father froze when it reached him, then let a single bent note slide out, a silver thread. The circle caught it, wove it. Theo's mom answered with a hum that placed the note on a shelf Theo could reach. He touched it, surprised, and the room felt the small click when a child finds the exact spot where sound becomes his. "Color?" Ms. Whitaker asked Luna when the little chain of pitch settled into a chord. "Yellow," Luna said, "but the kind of yellow inside a lemon, not the outside. Quiet, bright." Ms. Whitaker nodded as if this distinction answered a question she'd been asking privately for years. They moved into call and response. Theo's mom sang, a smile behind the consonant. The room echoed. "Ah? Ah." Theo's ah arrived a beat late and a mile brave. Anne laid a tiny cushion under it, a D that said, "Land here." He did. His mother's hands trembled where they rested on her knees. Ms. Whitaker blinked hard and pretended someone had handed her an onion. Diego hovered at the light slider with the seriousness of a small deity. "Moon, what do you think?" Anne asked. A ritual now. 4, he said, sliding the dial to the penciled mark. The lamps complied. The room exhaled into the new shade like a body into water at the right temperature. Mr. Benton kept finding uses for rhythm that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with being a person. He knocked patterns on his knee, 2 short, 1 long, and Harper mirrored him with a plastic cup. A row of dads joined without being asked, which is how you knew it had become a habit. They played for an hour that had kitchen clock minutes but church time wait. When it ended, the baby yawned again with dispatch authority. The room stayed full. People stacked chairs in silence that felt like listening's afterglow. The harmonica father tucked his instrument into his pocket as if it had earned a place there. Theo's mom hugged Anne fiercely and said, "Thank you for building a room where sound is allowed to be small first." The Ripples left the room with the coats. By the next week, Mr. Benton had made a list of things around the school that wobbled: coat hooks mounted at the wrong height, a bookcase that leaned like a tired uncle, the loose stair tread at the back exit. Everyone stepped around without naming. He taped the list to the staff room fridge with "Fix It Saturday" written at the top in block letters no one could misread. Parents who had been quick to critique in meetings signed up to carry lumber and hold a level steady. And watched a man who had once insisted on starting on time learn the pleasure of taking the exact time a screw needs to set straight. Ms. Whitaker's transformation was not so much a flip as a tide. In the next PTA meeting, she caught herself saying deliverables, paused, and replaced it with things we'll do together. When a new parent in the back row said, with a half smile, "I mean, bless you, but preschool is just babysitting," she did not bristle or wield data. She said evenly, "Come on Thursday night, bring a spoon, you'll change your mind." Then she wrote, "Bring," spoon on her clipboard and underlined it twice, grinning. Harper took to carrying her certificate telescope to music night and scanning the circle like a harbor master. The teenager with the ukulele started showing younger kids how to make 4 chords feel like 16, his cool surrendering to the fact that showing is its own kind of cool. The grandmother organist brought sheet music one evening and left it for anyone who wants to borrow a hymn, and also brought a story about her hands when they were less careful and more fast. In the classroom, Anne began to see the same listening leaking into daytimes. The cleanup song didn't need to be sung as loud. Children looked at one another before grabbing a block someone else wanted. When Diego flinched at a sudden shout, Nora laid her palm on his sleeve and said, "Moon, breathe at a 4." And he measured his chest to the number like a dimmer. One morning after drop-off, Ms. Ferreira leaned in the doorway, while Anne coaxed the upright into a key change for the toothbrushing chorus. "It's not just the nights," the principal said. "Something in the day feels less brittle." Anne nodded. "It's like the room is learning how to carry its own weight." "Exactly," Ms. Ferreira said. "We're stronger furniture." They both laughed at that, then didn't, because the metaphor was doing more work than the joke. She didn't stop thinking about the conservatory. Lasker wrote back to her text with a message that was not advice but recognition. "Cathedrals are where people gather. Proud. Keep the doors unlocked." A week later, a postcard arrived, the Charles River under a thin sheet of ice, with a single sentence on the back. "Technique is a tool. Hospitality is a craft." She pinned it above the upright like a quietly outrageous claim, and found that day by day, she agreed with it more. February thawed into a late winter that pretended to be spring. By then, family music night had acquired traditions. Someone always brought tea in a dented thermos. The lamps went on in a particular order because Diego insisted sequence mattered. Luna awarded the weekly sticker star to a new key. Anne kept them all, little constellations in a drawer, because people should be allowed to make a sky out of paper. One Thursday, Theo's mom introduced a call and response that didn't use pitch at all. "Say like you're content," she said. "Now say like you've disagreed but want to stay friends." The room tried it, surprised by the richness of the second sound. "We're learning prosody," she said. Then, realizing the word had escaped her therapist mouth, translated, "We're learning tone. The music underneath words." Mr. Benton looked at Anne over the Yamaha and nodded, as if to say, "We fix wobbles in sentences, too." Another night, the harmonica father, name finally learned, Daniel, played 2 notes instead of 1. He looked so pleased with himself that the circle answered with a small cheer. Ms. Whitaker, emboldened beyond cookies, asked, "What color?" Luna said, without missing a beat, "Blue, like a warm jacket." And Ms. Whitaker said, "I know exactly that blue." And thought, there it is, the room knowing itself. There were still ordinary difficulties. A tantrum on a Tuesday afternoon that refused all the tricks. A parent email that mistook curiosity for complaint. A stomach bug that traveled through the class with the patience of a pilgrim. In each, Anne found herself reaching for the same tools the room had taught her. Slow the tempo, widen the chord, leave space for late notes to land. When she forgot, someone else remembered, which is the proof that something has lived beyond your body. Spring finally arrived for real. Open windows, pollen, the soft roar of the playground. The showcase photo went up in the hallway glass case. People stopped to look. You could watch their faces change shape, as if the image filled in a blank none of them had known was bothering them. A father pointed at the photo and told his mother on the phone, "That's the night my kid learned not to be afraid of being seen." A child pointed and told a friend, "That's the night Ms. Ann's bench didn't wobble anymore," which was true in more ways than furniture. On the last Thursday before spring break, they didn't plan to sing "We Are the Lights." It had been a performance song. This was a circle. But Daniel blew that one warm note and Luna answered high, and the teenager found the 4 chords faster than pretense, and suddenly the room was on the edge of it, and set her hands down at D and did the smallest thing a musician can do: get out of the way. Verse 1. People mouth only, shy of their own voices. Verse 2. Sound lifting in uneven handfuls. Verse 3. You could hear relationships in the blend. A mother leaning toward her son. A grandmother supporting the bottom of a chord she'd carried for 60 years. A principal taking the harmony because leading isn't always loud. And thinned her playing until the keys were scaffolding. There if needed, invisible if not. They reached the suspended 4th without announcing it, like a group who knows where the bend in the river is. The room balanced on it together. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, and then settled, not on the resolution so much as into it. The sound wasn't in tune so much as it was in agreement. And looked around and thought, with a clarity that felt almost like architecture, there is no missing heart. It's distributed. It's how we're holding this up. She didn't cry. Not then. She kept time. Afterward, people lingered longer than usual. The cookies were reduced to crumbs and honest compliments. Ms. Whitaker stacked chairs and then unstacked one, sat and stayed. Mr. Benton measured nothing, checked no levels, simply listened to the room emptying itself of its own echo. "Same time next week?" someone asked from the doorway, rhetorical. "Same time next week," Anne said. She locked the community room, then the classroom. On impulse, she turned back, switched on the lamp by the upright, and opened the fallboard. The bench, Mr. Benton's workmanship, did not wobble even under a sigh. She pressed a sticker star, fresh from Luna's latest gift, on the wood above a key she almost never used. Habit had taught her to place brightness near middle C. Tonight she wanted a far edge to be brave, too. She played 1 chord and let it hum. Then another. The progression she'd first written in a notebook the night Evan canceled. Do, sol, la minor, fa. It did exactly what it had always done. Made the floor feel closer, the air warmer, the distance between people shorter than fear had measured it. Her phone buzzed. A photo from her mother, a pot of soup, steam curling up like a treble clef. "Enough for tomorrow," the text said. "Bring Luna a container. We share." Anne laughed, alone with the piano, and not alone at all. She typed back, "Our song again tonight." Then, because it felt right to loop the circle closed, she sent the same message to Lasker. 3 dots appeared, then, "Good. Keep playing where it counts." The next morning, at drop-off, a father stopped himself mid-sentence. "I don't know how you," he began, then revised, deliberate. "I'm learning how you do what you do. Thank you for teaching us." "Bring a spoon," Ms. Whitaker called from the bulletin board without turning. Thursday. On the last day before break, the class napped easy. Anne sat at the upright and let her fingers find the D again, softer than breath. She watched the rise and fall of small shoulders under blankets that smelled like laundry and playground. She thought of the judge's sentence, as far away now as a shoreline you can still smell but no longer need to steer by. She thought of the hospital Yamaha and her mother's brave lullaby request. She thought of benches and wobbles and the mercy of furniture doing its job. When the room was so quiet she could hear the heater's low murmur, she played one final chord. Not a flourish. A blanket. A light left on. She closed the fall board, turned off the lamp, and stood in the doorway a second longer than necessary, as if the room might tell her something if she gave it the chance. It did, in its way. The silence had changed since fall. It was not emptiness. It was capacity. And stepped into the hall, pulled the door until the latch clicked, and felt the small satisfaction of a thing that fit. Outside, late snow had started again, small and private. She tugged her scarf up, tucked her hands into her sleeves, and started home. Tomorrow there would be soup, and parents who wanted to help, and children who would keep teaching adults what listening is for. Next Thursday, there would be a circle of chairs and whatever notes people could spare. If anyone, anywhere, still said preschool teachers only babysit, perhaps they'd wander in one night and catch the song mid-bridge. They'd hear a one-note harmonica become part of a chord, a shy ah find its landing, a room deciding to hold a suspension together. They'd see a sticker star in a place no program mentions. They'd understand how a heart can be everywhere at once when it belongs to a room. And walked through the quiet, the rhythm of her steps sinking to a song she didn't need to play to hear. When she reached the corner, she stopped, looked back at the glow in the school's second-story window, and smiled. "We'll play our song," she said aloud to nobody, to everybody. "We'll keep the doors unlocked."